Hi folks, Florida Man here, and this is a diplomacy commentary on a War in the Americas variant map game that I played on PlayDiplomacy. For this one, I interviewed one of the other players, whose name is George, or username MasterGR. This is part 1. Please enjoy. Hello George / MasterGR.
Hello, everyone.
It's a pleasure having you on here, since we just finished playing this War in the Americas variant game of diplomacy. I'm sharing my screen with you so that you can answer questions about the game as it went for me, and we'll discuss our respective plans, tactics, the diplomacy with the various people involved, and how the game went.
Sounds good to me.
So, just to get started, please tell the audience which country you played.
I played Great Britain in this game, or GB, otherwise known.
And I played Spain. I assume you've played on the War in the Americas map before.
Yeah, I played 4 or 5, maybe 6 games. Yeah, not too many, but I played a few.
That sounds about like me. Have you played Great Britain before?
No, that was my first time. I was actually very eager to try it.
It is kind of an exciting power to play. I've been Great Britain before myself, but I found it kind of unwieldy. You know, too much going on, too many different regions, and impossible to ever protect the Falklands.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to play Great Britain actually because exactly it's in so many regions, so I thought it would give me, an opportunity to talk with everybody on the board, especially because of the Falklands as well. And it really did do that. I mean, spoiler alert, I will lose the Falklands eventually, but I did manage to keep them actually for a few years. I think I was looking at the PlayDiplomacy, archived games, and I think I have seen one time Great Britain actually at least once keep like the Falklands and even like build a small empire in the deep south. But I think that's probably very challenging to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that must have required a lot of diplomatic finesse and probably a disproportionate amount of effort in the South. All right, why don't we get into what you were thinking at the beginning of this specific game, what your plans were, what your communications were like. What were you doing in 1840 or 1841, I should say?
Yeah, sure. So my initial goal of the game was obviously to keep as many of my colonies as possible. Without actually expecting to keep all of them. My ideal scenario was one where I would eventually unify Canada with the Caribbean. So to be absolutely honest with you, I know you were playing Spain. I did see Spain as a bit of an obstacle towards that goal. So I was, fairly set on taking it out. But, with that said, communication is always a factor. And who's playing what. So I did again work to unify ideally Canada with the Caribbean, but I was also giving a chance to every player in between, and see how it goes. My initial diplomacy was I wanted to make sure that Venezuela was on my side because if Venezuela is not with you, you can just lose Trinidad in the first year, which is a pretty poor outcome. I mean, it robs you of a home center plus, it's a loss, it's a center loss, right? But it's also a key center for building in the Caribbean.
Quite a big deal, yes.
Yeah. So Venezuela was one, Spain was the other, and I was talking with you, I think, quite a bit in the early game.
Yes, you were. And to be honest, my early perspective, and I think my general perspective is that as Spain, what I really need is just to have one solid ally, ideally one of you or Mexico as a solid ally. And I did not feel like I was making good progress with either of you. And frankly, long term, as Spain, I would probably want to get rid of Great Britain because we're both the island powers in the Caribbean, and it's, there's an extent to which I can't help but think, maybe it's not big enough for the both of us, unless you're focusing almost entirely on Northern South America, and I'm focusing almost entirely on Mexico and the USA.
Yeah.
But I felt it was a little unlikely that was going to happen, and also that the ideal just would be that I would control Jamaica and Trinidad as well as the islands in between us. So I was trying to forge those connections with Mexico and the USA that would allow me to fight you. But also, aware that I wasn't getting very much from them, I was trying to work with you because that was an alternate option. But even though we exchanged a lot of messages, I don't think you and I ever really came to a good agreement.
Yeah. So the game was pretty interesting. So if I can give a little bit of background of the early communications, I remember talking with the USA early on, and I actually suggested that we do a bounce in the Erie Canal. It seems to me that that's kind of a no-brainer, to be honest, for Great Britain, because if the US gets into the Erie Canal, Great Britain is in a pretty rough position, and the same is true actually for the US. So it seemed to me that a bounce over there would have been good for both of us.
Very sensible. It's
yeah.
like the Black Sea.
What's that?
I said it's like the Black Sea on the classic map.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not really. I mean, I have gone through a few games. I don't think I have seen ever anybody do a bounce there. At least it didn't seem to me that it was something that has been agreed upon before. But it seems to me like an excellent way to start the game with the USA. The USA did bounce me there, but I guess once we go to the next, to the fall, we will actually see that the USA also moved to New England, so that didn't really help me a lot.
We're now looking at the spring orders.
Yeah.
So yeah, the USA did bounce you there. And the way I've done this, because the War in the Americas map is very long, is that I've split it up so that you can see half of the map on one slide and the other half of the map will be visible on the next.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, like the US and I bounced there, and then the US also moved to New England while I moved to North Atlantic to hopefully grab Greenland. And obviously that was not something that built any confidence in the USA for me. And even more so, it was also kind of pointless because I maybe if you have moved to both the Erie Canal and New England, so maybe you have some potential to do some damage there to Great Britain. But if you just move a fleet into New England, the only place where this can go is Halifax. And there is no actually coast connecting New England to Montreal, so you cannot even move to Montreal with that fleet. So I mean, best you can do is just prevent Great Britain from getting Greenland at that point. So that was not great. And then meanwhile, looking at the Caribbean, I remember at the time talking a lot with Venezuela, and I was lucky, I think, because I managed to get and develop a very good relationship with Venezuela. And Venezuela at the time told me, and I don't know if that's true or not, but Venezuela told me that he promised you that he would move to East Caribbean because you asked him to move to East Caribbean, obviously to bounce me out of it. Again, I don't know if there is truth in that or not, whether you actually made that suggestion to him.
It is true.
It is true. Yeah. And I was kind of surprised, that in Venezuela told me, okay, I did actually promise Spain I'm going to move to East Caribbean, but I'm going to do it. I'm like, wow, you didn't have to promise it, but sure, I'll take that. So that, obviously built some really good early trust with Venezuela. And at the time I was thinking, okay, if I move to East Caribbean and I don't get bounced by Venezuela, and I think you had actually asked me to open in North Caribbean and you wanted to get 3 centers, right? You wanted to get the Bahamas, Haiti, and Santo Domingo, if I recall. And I was thinking, that's like a lot of centers for Spain to get in year one. And if Spain gets those 3 centers in year one, I'm doomed, basically, in the Caribbean. There's no way I'm going to be able to hold anything there. Plus, I couldn't really get much out of it myself. I mean, I could go to Guyana and try to get maybe Suriname, which is not a center that can be actually contested in year one for Great Britain if it opens in Guyana. And obviously, I would also go for Nicaragua. But I was thinking, still, once you had like 6 fleets in the Caribbean, you were solid there. There was no way you were getting kicked out, until like the late game maybe. So
sounds like you were making your decisions here based on you didn't want me to get strong.
I mean, I could have maybe negotiated, for you to get 2 centers, but 3 centers, it was a tough send.
Well,
yeah.
I can understand that. I wasn't necessarily expecting I would actually get all 3 in the first year. I was just hoping that I would get all 3 eventually.
Okay.
Because, yeah, if that would have been okay with me, just to get all 3 eventually.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't want for me to be in Santo Domingo and you to be in Haiti or something, to have your center right in the middle of my centers.
Yeah, it's hard to serve the island. I definitely get that. It's hard to serve the Haiti/Santo Domingo island. Yeah. Yeah, but my math was, if I bounce Spain in North Caribbean and I get in East Caribbean, then best case scenario, Spain gets one build, right? Because, Spain can get the Bahamas and maybe, or like Haiti and Santo Domingo, or the Bahamas and Santo Domingo. And then, I can either bounce Spain out of one of those, or I can take Puerto Rico, or I can take a shot at Puerto Rico anyways. And, I could have gone for Haiti, for example, hoping that you wouldn't go for it. And in that case, actually, you would get two builds, right? But I think, the way I was thinking about it, if I go for Puerto Rico, you will only get one build at the most. So that that really was my play there. And I think that's what happened in the end in that scene.
Anything interesting to talk about in South America for this season before we move on to fall?
Yeah, South America, really quick. I was talking with Argentina and Chile at the time, right? And basically my goal was to get Patagonia, obviously. Just as a side note, I have thought that it would have been actually a nice opening for Great Britain to open in South Atlantic in the first year, because that connects to Mid-Atlantic, right? And then next year, so in fall, you can be Mid-Atlantic, and then the following year, you can actually have another unit on Sargasso. But I think if you open that way, you're almost guaranteed to lose the Malvinas in the second year. Plus, you lose a shot at Patagonia, right? So if I had known for a fact that somebody else would go for Patagonia, either Argentina or Chile, maybe I would have opened in South Atlantic. But based on the
no one else did.
What's that? Yeah, nobody else did. Yeah.
So you made the right choice, I think. I mean.
Yeah, at the time, both Argentina and Chile told me that they would not open for Patagonia. I talked Argentina quite a bit into opening towards Brazil, and Brazil actually was kind of oblivious to that. And I thought, Argentina is probably playing me because Brazil is telling me that Argentina has a deal with them. And I really had not received that many messages from Argentina, but in the end, Argentina actually did open against Brazil, and Chile itself did tell me that he wouldn't go for Patagonia, and I told him, hey, let me go for Patagonia, then maybe I can help you with Argentina or something. So actually, and I think Chile actually made a pretty solid opening. It's probably the best opening you can make, especially given that Peru also opened Tarapacá. So that gave Chile the option to support itself into Antofagasta, which it did afterwards.
Oh, I agree. I think Chile made a very strong opening here for what Chile's interests actually are, and the fact that Peru made such a kind of potentially anti-Chilean opening.
Yeah, it really did. Peru also made actually an anti-NG opening. Generally, the opening of Peru in this map, in this year, I found it not very friendly towards any of its immediate neighbors. And NG, meanwhile, had arranged the bounce in Santa Marta with Venezuela, which I knew about, which is, it's fine for Venezuela, but actually I think it's a pretty bad move for New Granada, because then New Granada only has one unit for Ecuador. I cannot recall actually whether New Granada in fact got Ecuador or not here. I think it did.
Well, New Granada did capture Panama, so that's good.
Yeah. But Panama is a given pretty much, I think, for New Granada in the 41. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say, the other person I was talking with a lot actually was Mexico, and I was really pushing Mexico not to let the USA get Texas, because, USA with two builds in the first year, that's 4 units right there, right? That the USA starts with. Yeah, and then USA also gets Chicago. If it also gets Texas, it's 6 units. And against my, say maybe 3, maybe 4 units in the north, depending on how many builds I get, it's not ideal. But Mexico actually was pretty content to let the USA have Texas.
Well, from his positioning here, he looks pretty well prepared to mess with Texas.
Yeah, it really, he really does, right?
Yes. Was that your persuasion?
Maybe. So okay, in my view, Mexico has only one guaranteed sender in this map in the first year, and that's Texas actually, right? Mexico cannot really guarantee anything else. It can be bounced out of Yucatan. And to be honest, even Texas is not guaranteed if Havana chooses to bounce Gulf of Mexico, which happens sometimes. But, as long as Mexico gets access to Gulf of Mexico, Mexico can guarantee Texas for itself. Anything else is much less of a certainty. So I'm guessing that Mexico to some extent opened like this to have a shot at Texas. But if I recall, actually, Mexico did not end up attacking Texas. It played nice towards the USA. which was pretty frustrating to me, especially given how the US had opened against me, and I had also kind of opened a little bit aggressive towards you in the Caribbean. So I was getting pretty concerned actually about the Spain-US alliance against me at the time.
Well, I was trying to get US against you, especially after the opening.
The fall.
Oh, fall, not year two. Yes, the fall. We see USA is not really attacking you, at least not really, not right now.
Yeah, so the USA, I managed to convince the US that he had nothing to gain by going for Halifax, and I told him I was going to cover it. Unfortunately, I did. I should have gone for Greenland, obviously, but hindsight is 2020 in diplomacy, right?
You being more cautious here was probably the wiser choice. If US had gotten into Halifax, I think your whole game looks very different.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, if the US is in Halifax, then yeah, maybe I build in Montreal. But, I am in Greenland. Greenland is actually not a position that you can easily come back from if you don't have other support, and especially the US is in Halifax, right? So my whole game would just become much, much harder, as you say. But I did convince the US to move away. And Mexico, as we can see here, actually did allow the US to keep Texas and even reinforce it with the US moving to New Orleans. Though maybe that's a good thing for Mexico, because it means that the US can now not build a fleet in New Orleans. And meanwhile, yeah, I got out of Jamaica hoping to be able to build there, and I got into Puerto Rico thinking that most likely you would try to gain a center at the time, which I think actually was a pretty key move for me. And luckily also Venezuela kept playing nice towards me and went for Guyana.
Everything about these moves went as badly as it possibly could for me.
Yeah, a little rough for Spain, but at least you did still gain a build, right? But I mean, yeah, losing Puerto Rico, in my view, it's one of those castles in this map. Like, I think Puerto Rico, Jamaica, maybe Trinidad, they are like some of those territories, and the Bahamas, that are just pretty tough to conquer in the island spaces. So I think once somebody gets Puerto Rico, it's really a center that can carry you to the end of the game.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult thing losing Puerto Rico, especially given that for me, it was a home center. At the same time, I did gain the two centers I tried to take. I was really hoping that you were actually not going to attack me or even bounce me. I was thinking maybe you would try for Haiti or Santo Domingo and we would just bounce. But it went much worse than that for me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. To some extent, it's equivalent. But yeah, even had you been able to keep Puerto Rico, then you would have built it, right? So had we bounced in either Haiti or Santo Domingo, is not a huge deal, because then you can take whatever we bounced at, you can take it in the next year, right? And then you also build Puerto Rico, and you're actually pretty golden against me, especially if the US doesn't come your way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any other comments actually about this phase here and like the diplomacy that you recall?
At this point, I was trying to get everyone to attack you that I could, and it was a very frustrating season for me because I thought Venezuela was perfectly positioned to attack you, even though Venezuela didn't do what I wanted by bouncing you in the Caribbean. He did move to Cumana. That should have been an easy move from there into Trinidad, but he decided to go for what wasn't even a center, the Guyana Current. He could have taken Georgetown. It didn't make any sense what he did.
Yeah. I do remember actually Venezuela's reasoning. If you want, I can go through what Venezuela told me at the time.
Oh, yeah. Please.
So Venezuela at the time, Venezuela, we didn't talk about Brazil, right? But Brazil opened in Mato Grosso, which I mean, is a very standard opening for Brazil. And then it opened the South Salvador fleet. It opened it to Para in the first spring, right? So then what happened was now Brazil had two on Manaus. I think that's a very valid opening actually for Brazil, because Venezuela cannot really guarantee Manaus, right? Venezuela can open Manaus, but it cannot keep it if Brazil actually goes for it in the fall. Yeah, perhaps one mistake that Brazil made here was that it supported the fleet into Manaus instead of the army, right? So at the time there were no actual other units bordering Mato Grosso, so Brazil could have supported Mato Grosso into Manaus, and it's much better to have an army in Manaus, obviously, because the army can go anywhere else. The fleet can only go to Amazonia or Para once it gets into Manaus. Para is, an important position for Brazil. Amazonia is pretty useless at this point, especially since it does not really connect to any other centers. So I think at the time, in any case, Venezuela was worried about Brazil, and he told me, well, I can open in Georgetown, but I think I'm going to instead open in Guyana Current, so that when Brazil dislodges me from Manaus, I can actually retreat to Georgetown, and I can at least, get Suriname the following year. Plus, I'm going to have a unit in Guyana, which is going to prevent Brazil from getting in there. I think it was pretty valid reasoning from Venezuela's side at the time, to be honest.
Well, now it make more sense. Some very pessimistic reasoning, I guess, assuming he couldn't talk his way into keeping Manaus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think there was some good reasoning there. Yeah. Do you have any other recollections from this phase?
I was trying to get, Mexico and the USA to attack you as well. I was just trying to get whatever help I could anywhere. I think I tried New Granada as well.
Yeah.
New Granada was basically not picking up the phone. Mexico was starting to seem like he might be on your side. USA, who I thought was actually taking me up and attacking you, just does exactly the opposite of what I wanted.
Yeah. That was successful in convincing the US to move away there, luckily.
You did very well diplomatically here.
Yeah, and Mexico, Mexico doesn't really have a lot of potential to attack Great Britain early on, but if Mexico plays really nice with the USA, that's obviously bad for Great Britain, and Mexico was playing really nice with the USA, so instead of going for Texas, it opened for Yucatan, and then Chiapas, which allows him to go to Guatemala afterwards. So it's a pretty solid opening for Mexico, plus Apacheria, which allows him to go for Alta California after, but it was not the opening I wanted to see, to be honest. New Granada, as you said, was not picking the phone. I think at the time I remember hearing from New Granada that it was busy with real life, and I think New Granada actually answered the first message like 3 days after the beginning of the game. So, and everybody was wondering what's going on with New Granada. But once New Granada started talking, they were pretty reasonable, right? But yeah, generally their communication was not very consistent, and I think they were afraid they were gonna get Ecuador there, so they kept Panama, but then opened into Gulf of Chiriquí over there, which was, it meant they were only getting one bill. But still, I think Granada in the end did all right actually early on, and Peru actually didn't end up getting Ecuador there.
Yeah, that's interesting that they didn't communicate, because the New Granada could have had Ecuador. And maybe Peru would have gotten Galapagos instead.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there exactly, but my guess is that New Granada didn't trust Peru at the time, and thought that maybe Peru would go for Ecuador. Even I think Peru had told New Granada that it wouldn't. Yeah, but anyway, I guess this part of the action didn't affect us much. And other than that, I managed to get Patagonia over there at the bottom, which was definitely pretty helpful.
Yes, that's, again, everything you're doing with your diplomacy seems to be going as well as it possibly can here.
Yeah, it was overall a pretty good year. Other than Mexico, again, that was the only thing. I was hoping Mexico would go for the US, but it didn't.
That's true. He did not exactly go for the throat against the US.
Yeah, he let the US keep Texas, basically.
But, Mexico would have been starting a fight for literally no benefit to him, because he would not have gained any additional centers numerically. He would have been getting Texas instead of Yucatan, but that would have been starting a fight and not getting any additional builds.
Yeah. No, I think it was very sensible what Mexico did. It just was not what I wanted him to do, but from Mexico's perspective, it was very sensible, I agree.
Going to the retreats phase, just as you were mentioning, Venezuela goes to Georgetown.
Yeah. And so gets its first center, yeah.
Your first center through a retreat.
It was a bit of a risk actually that Venezuela took there, but it worked out for them. Yeah.
Yes. So now we're in the builds phase, and you chose to build in Montreal, Halifax, as well as Jamaica and Trinidad.
So actually, I think I didn't build in Halifax because I had just covered it from North Atlantic, right? I did build in Montreal, and I built in Jamaica and Trinidad, and I think that's...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so that's 3 builds, and I think I got Toronto, I got Jamaica, I got Toronto, I got Puerto Rico, and I got Patagonia. So yeah, these were my 3 builds right there. And you built in Santiago de Cuba. I was a little curious actually why you built in Santiago and not in Havana at the time, because that once Mexico builds in Veracruz, as it did, and opens in Gulf of Mexico, then it has direct access to Havana. So I did expect you to build in Havana, and I was a little surprised. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. I was really hoping and kind of expecting that Mexico would remain neutral at worst in our conflict and not attack me alongside you. And I was also thinking that while I would need Haiti and Santo Domingo to secure East Caribbean from you, that I could move Santiago de Cuba up to Canal Viejo de Bahama and take the Bahamas while I was fighting you. And that would give me the edge that I needed in order to have more fleets than you in the water. And that was really the only way I could see myself actually winning the fight is if I got an extra build from there, because there was nowhere else I could get a build from, and as things stood, we were equally matched in numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so your goal at the time was to open in Canal Viejo and get the Bahamas.
Then Mexico builds in Veracruz.
Was that not part of the deal with Mexico? Did you have a deal with him?
No, not really. I really wanted Mexico to attack you, as I said, but Mexico seemed already to be more interested in working with you and siding with you, so I wasn't able to reach much of a deal with him.
It was interesting. Again, with Mexico, I was talking a lot, and I was really putting a lot of pressure on him to move on the US. And I think what did it was in 42, Venezuela actually, he sent, I think, a pretty long message to Mexico, which he sent to me as well, where he really encouraged Mexico to move on the United States, because the USA was getting 6 builds, right? Was getting 2 builds, would have like 6 units, which we see here. He actually built in Washington, D.C. West Coast. That was another foul by the USA, by the way. The USA, after moving away from New England to Gulfstream, I thought, okay, we can make this work. But maybe I made the mistake of telling him I was going to build a fleet in Montreal. I think he didn't like that, even though I was not actually planning on sending that fleet against the US, if the US would let me be. But the US really didn't like that. So the US ended up building in Washington, D.C. West Coast, which borders the Eastern Great Lake. And, if the US got in there, I was dead, basically. That's the reason why I built in Montreal, because the US did build there. It's kind of, again, like the Black Sea, maybe. It's one sea area, it borders, I don't know how many centers there for, and 2 of them are mine, so.
Yes, and frankly, the West Coast Washington, D.C. fleet is completely useless for anything except attacking you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a giveaway, basically. Yeah, once that fleet goes in there, it can go nowhere else.
Kind of the most aggressive build he could possibly have chosen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was hoping I would just, move Halifax back to now, North Atlantic, and then, grab Greenland, and maybe move Montreal to Halifax. But after the US built the way it did, I'm like, okay, now I have to play this differently. So there was a lot of struggle, actually, in the early game with the United States, and also in the Caribbean, with you. It was a very interesting game early on.
Anything interesting about the builds in South America for you?
Yeah, so what happened here was that a couple of things, I guess. First, Chile built a fleet in Talca, which it's great for me, right? If Chile builds armies in Santiago and in Talca, then he can get both in Mendoza and Aysén and just grab Patagonia in the fall of 42. Cool. So, yeah, that was definitely a positive development there, that I didn't have to worry about the Malvinas. At the same time, I couldn't build in the Malvinas because I was feeling the heat from the USA, and also I knew that after I took Puerto Rico, things between us wouldn't go down well. So I just couldn't afford to reinforce the Malvinas, and I think that's what ended up costing both of those centers to me later on. The fact that I just was not in a position to build in the Malvinas. On the other hand, as much as it's nice to have centers in South America, from a big picture perspective, it's not going to win you the game.
It's not that important for Britain.
Exactly. So I chose to reinforce my north. Still a good sign from Chile there, and then Argentina and Brazil have already started the game fighting, so also good for me that they are fighting, because it means that also Argentina is not going to be incentivized actually to come after me. Looking at the center, I think I was kind of surprised actually by Brazil building an army in Sao Paulo, because Brazil already had a front with Venezuela, and now Venezuela can walk into Para. I mean, yeah, it's just a bit of a tough position, I think, for Brazil at this point.
Brazil has ongoing conflict with Argentina, ongoing conflict with Venezuela at the opposite end of his country, and potentially a fight with Peru, because Peru moved into Santa Cruz, which is right next to Brazil.
Yeah. Even though I should say, I think in this map, actually, Peru can guarantee Santa Cruz if it opens the right way in the first spring, right? If Peru opens to Beni and La Paz. But Peru didn't do that, actually. But regardless, in the end, yeah, Peru is in Santa Cruz now. Things are not looking very good for Brazil. And New Granada builds a fleet in Cali West Coast, which I believe is also something that I had asked him at the time, and it's a good thing for me, right? The fewer fleets there are in the Caribbean, the better off I am. I mean, that's true for you too. But I think in this particular scenario, I am the one who's facing the North and South America, right? So fleets in Cartagena or like Caracas can only be bad for me and good for you. So I was pretty excited to actually see that none of them built a fleet there.
Very frustrating for me that neither Venezuela nor New Granada is interested at all in building fleets, yet Mexico is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Mexico split on the other hand, pretty good thing for me. I'm excited to see that. Yeah. Mexico also now is in position to get Guatemala. So overall, I would say, Mexico is actually having a very positive outlook for the second year.
Yeah, Mexico is doing well, I think. Going to spring 1842.
That was an interesting opening here, actually. Yeah. Did you want to actually give me your own thoughts? Because I thought I definitely didn't expect you to move to East Caribbean at this time.
I was thinking I was going to bounce with you.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty hilarious. I'm like, okay, I was thinking about it. What do I do? Do I open North Caribbean? Like if I open North Caribbean, then I'm in a pretty good position. If I don't open in North Caribbean, there is no way he's going to support himself with 3 units this Caribbean. And obviously I was wrong about that because you sent everything in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I threw everything I had at East Caribbean. And that turned out not to have been the best decision here, obviously.
Yeah. No, that was I think painful for you the way things turned out over here, because I got into North Caribbean, which borders 3 of your centers, 2 of them home centers, and then because you actually open Canal Viejo, I get a free shot at Havana as well. So I'm like, okay, this is actually looking pretty good. Like Spain in East Caribbean, maybe not the best thing for me, but I can still cover my centers. And I can take a shot at one of Spain's centers. So actually, yeah, this is looking kind of promising for me. I think my only fear there was actually dislodging you. So if I recall, I didn't actually dislodge you. I believe Venezuela was actually kind of annoyed because he was like, you told me you were going to cover East Caribbean. Why Spain in East Caribbean right now? I mean, I told Venezuela at the time, I don't think that Spain is going to go for Caracas, but Venezuela was not very happy. And then, yeah, meanwhile, up north, I mean, it was expected now that the US is going to be a pain in my backside, right? So after he built in DC West Coast, so the US and I bounced in DC. I was thinking, okay, what do I do with Halifax if I open in North Atlantic? Then I leave myself kind of wide open there. If I open in New England, depending on what the US does, I can at least threaten New York. And meanwhile, the US cannot actually cover New York from Washington DC West Coast, so I did have that going for me. So bounce, and then I did actually get into New England over there. The US gets into the Erie Canal, but I couldn't bounce the US outside of both the lakes and the Erie Canal. And while the Erie Canal is important, what is much more important is actually the lakes. So I had to bounce the lakes and allow him to get into the Erie. And if he did, then I actually got into New England. I had that going for me. I could threaten New York. And then meanwhile, looking at the diplomacy elsewhere, I was pushing Mexico at this point, to open against the US. And I told him, hey, you just cannot allow Texas to get into Chihuahua. If he does, you're kind of done. I mean, Chihuahua borders all 3 home centers of Mexico. And as I was saying before, Venezuela actually sent a message to Mexico that I think really convinced Mexico to work with me. My understanding is that Mexico actually was very skeptical about working with me because Mexico suspected that I'm a fair player. And I think that's the main reason why he didn't want to work with me, actually, from what he told me. But he was convinced by Venezuela finally to move on the US because the US was getting too strong. And, once the US got Canada, I mean, where else will the US go? Mexico, it's kind of like natural. At that point, luckily, Mexico, opened also in Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, the US actually moved to Tennessee Valley, which leaves Texas unattended, right? So now Mexico can can get Texas without even having to use 3 of its units. Mexico can get Texas just by using Apacheria and Chihuahua. And at that point, the US actually got very frustrated at Mexico and told me, okay, I'm going to go full on against Mexico. He told me that he was going to make a bunch of moves against Mexico after the resolution of this phase. And I said, okay, let's see it. But that really turned the tide there, the fact that Mexico actually made a move on Texas because the US was really unhappy about it. So that was a big help for me in this year, together with the unexpected move in succeeding in the North Caribbean.
Were you going to actually stop fighting USA if he did go after Mexico?
I think you will see later what happened, but I was definitely going to give the US some time to move away from me. But I mean, the US had lied to me twice at this point, right? So the US first opened in New England when it told me it wouldn't open to New England, and then it built a fleet in Washington DC West Coast when it told me it wouldn't build a fleet there. So I had there were already 2 strikes from the US. So it was hard for me to see not fighting the US sooner or later because I just knew I couldn't trust the US after he had lied twice to me.
Some people are fundamentally untrustworthy that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, 1 strike, I can get over 1 strike. 2 strikes, it's not a good sign. But I was going to let the US move away from me. I was going to give the US a chance to move away from me, right? Like you also, once somebody gets stabbed, and they tell you, hey, I'm just going to send everything the other way, you don't want to immediately move on them. Typically, I think you want to give them a chance to actually move away, because that will help you and maybe establish a little bit of trust from their side. And if you're still planning on moving on them, still better to build a little bit of trust and start them a little more effectively later on than make a move right away, to be honest.
Agreed. I think that covers what was going on in the north. Anything of interest in your mind in the south this season?
The south, kind of like expected moves in general. I moved to Folta Current there. I thought about maybe moving to Bahia Blanca, but that would just like make Argentina's life hard. And I was thinking, I don't really want to threaten Argentina here. Venezuela was my ally. If I mess with Argentina, then Venezuela will be annoyed at me because both of them are fighting Brazil. So I had no incentive there to do that. Meanwhile, Argentina was kind enough to bounce Chile out of Mendoza. And I remember that Chile and Argentina actually were not really talking to each other. So that was a good thing for me too. But like Argentina told me, I'm just going to bounce Mendoza because I don't trust Chile. And I was like, okay, that's great, because it means Chile is not going to get into Mendoza. Other than that, here, Peru actually, that's pretty interesting, right? Peru makes actually a full-on attack on New Granada at this point. I remember, actually, this is kind of key. I remember really hard diplomatically pushing New Granada not to go for Nicaragua. I was telling him, hey, like the US is about to eat me alive. I'm already fighting Mexico. If you don't let Nicaragua for me, I'm doomed. Please leave it for me. And New Granada actually obliged, kind of surprisingly. He didn't go for Nicaragua, even though he could have gotten, or he could have threatened it at least. And I was telling him, hey, I'm going to probably get it in spring. He was like, well, you shouldn't get it in spring. It's probably better for you to get it in fall. But in the end, New Granada didn't actually go for it, which was helpful, even though in the end, I think I didn't actually ever get Nicaragua in this game. So I was feeling a little bad because I convinced New Granada not to go for Nicaragua, and then and then I didn't get Nicaragua myself. So, and then New Granada got attacked full on by Peru, which was not maybe ideal, right? Ideally, you want to keep the balances. You don't want Peru to actually come out too strong against New Granada and do very well against it. But I think New Granada ended up actually playing a solid defense there anyway. And then some funny moves in the south, like Chile moving to Potosi and Peru moving to Tarapacá. That seemed like a bit of a mess there. I asked actually Chile why he did that, why he moved to Potosi, and he told me it was a miscalculation. I mean, if Chile wanted to take Argentina, he should have moved to Tucumán, right? And then Peru moving to Tarapacá also doesn't show good faith towards Chile. But I didn't mind any of that, actually. The more chaos on the board, the better, right? As long as it's not in your area.
South America is absolutely nuts this year. I understand why Peru is moving the way he is. He's being very aggressive, and I think he shouldn't be aggressive in two directions at once. Yeah. I think attacking New Granada full out is a good play, because New Granada won't have any ally to help him fight Peru. But if he does that, then he can't simultaneously antagonize Chile by going back to Tarapacá.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, that was kind of poor play diplomatically, I think, for Peru there. Yeah. But the move to bounce Gulf of Panama obviously was a good one, at least in some ways. But I think overall it was actually a pretty good move because he also trapped the Panama army where it was. Yeah,
his tactical play has been pretty good so far.
Yeah, decent. But it's just, as you say, alliance-wise, he seems to be kind of antagonizing all of his neighbors, both in year one and year two.
Yes, he's not doing so much against Brazil, I think, but the problem is Brazil's not really in great shape.
Right. He's definitely letting Brazil fight it out, but I think that's a good thing for Peru, right? Because if actually Peru starts, bothering Brazil falls faster, that benefits mostly Argentina and Venezuela. It doesn't really benefit Peru much. So I think it was good play out of Peru there.
Yes. Going to the fall.
Yeah. In the fall. Yeah, go ahead.
Mexico finally attacks USA and also me.
Right. So that was when my relationship with Mexico started to heat up quite a bit, right? Like we really started to kick it there. Mexico actually asked me, can I have Havana? And I said, well, sure. Why don't you grab Havana? I didn't tell Mexico I was also going to make a move for Santiago, but what I was thinking was, I'm going to let Mexico have Havana because that definitely takes a center out of Spain. And I was thinking most likely Spain is going to go for the Bahamas. So I can also jump into Santiago de Cuba because Spain is probably going to expect me to go for Havana and he's not going to expect Mexico to go for Havana. So, in that way, hey, we can grab even more Spanish centers and we can Spain even further. Plus, strong Mexico is not a bad thing for me, right? I do want Mexico actually to be strong. So Mexico goes for Havana. He also grabs Texas. The USA just as promised, makes like a full retreat and, goes like 100% moves everything towards Mexico. And I play it safe, right? I kind of like protect Halifax there, and then I don't make any other aggressive moves. I don't move to the Erie or anything like that. The only aggressive move that I make towards the USA is move to Michigan, which is a move that I can actually sell to the USA as, hey, I did everything you told me, but I just had to have a fail-safe there in case he actually didn't follow through. So I moved to Michigan, and the US is actually okay with that. I mean, he was not very happy about the move to Michigan, but it was not a deal breaker with him, given that I followed through with everything else. So that, gives me some options for the next year without antagonizing the USA too much. Yeah, looking at the Caribbean, you moved to West Caribbean. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I am just trying to kind of outguess you at this point, because the tactical play is my only play left. I've lost the strategic game. I've lost the diplomatic game. You guys have me surrounded. I'm just trying to keep you out of my centers as long as possible and maybe snatch a dot or two on the way. So my thinking is I can't take Jamaica right now. Most likely you would bounce me, which is actually the way you move.
Yeah.
If you're going to bounce me in Jamaica, it means you're vacating West Caribbean. So maybe I can get into West Caribbean and East Caribbean at the same time. And if I can do that, then I would probably be able to take Jamaica from you. And if I couldn't take Jamaica from you, at least I have some leverage. Maybe I can get you to back off or give back Havana or something.
Yeah.
And at the least now I'm in position maybe to just take Nicaragua.
Yeah, I think this was a good play from you. I mean, this is always a question, right? When you're in a situation like this, you always think, should I cover my center? Most likely the other person is not going to go for my center, because if they bounce me there, then I can build. So most likely the play that Spain is going to make is go to West Caribbean. Sorry, go anywhere else but Jamaica. I couldn't have known you to go to West Caribbean. But what I was thinking is, can I really risk it? And I remember the other thing in the end I decided was, I have to try and dislodge you out of East Caribbean. So I think Puerto Rico there supported Trinidad into East Caribbean. And, given that I was actually planning to do that, there was no way I could afford to actually have you retreat into Jamaica if I didn't cover it, right? So I had to cover Jamaica because I was planning to try and dislodge you out of it. You also surprised me when you actually went for Santiago. I think that was a very good play from your side. But you actually saw that Mexico and I were going to coordinate, I think, here. So you made the move to cover it.
Yeah, as I said before, I was pretty suspicious that Mexico was just on your side by this point. And I was glad that at least I had the strategic sense to figure that out, albeit that it was just in time to save one of my centers, leaving with only a single one of my home centers at this point.
Yeah, definitely painful. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think at this year, I didn't actually gain any centers. I cannot remember what happened in the South, to be honest. But I mean, I didn't gain any centers, but it was actually key that you lost the center by losing Havana, because at this point, any unit that you destroy is good for me.
Let's talk about anything interesting happening in the South.
So at this point, I actually suspected that Chile would go for Magallanes. That was a pretty hilarious play, I have to say. But because, I could have just... So Chile could either go for Drake Passage or Magallanes, right, if it wanted to come after me. And the most likely play is Drake Passage. I mean, Drake Passage it's a very important territory in the map. And I'm like, okay, if Chile goes for Drake Passage and I go for Magallanes, then I lose the Malvinas, pretty much, right? The Falklands. Because in the spring, Chile is in Drake Passage, that's adjacent to Malvinas, I've lost them. But Chile actually didn't go for Drake Passage, and I guessed him correctly there. I think he expected me to think that I would go for, he expected me to go for Drake Passage, so you went for Magallanes, and I actually read him, and we bounced there, which was pretty hilarious. I don't think, you're not going to see a bounce in Magallanes often in the early game, I think.
No, I agree.
So at this point, it becomes pretty clear that Chile is out to get my southern possessions. Meanwhile, Argentina thankfully still bounces Chile and Mendoza. Chile unfortunately gets the Galapagos, but that was, I think, expected, right? It was expected that New Granada would actually go for Hawaii. Peru gets Ecuador. So the battle between New Granada and Peru, start to heat up over here. And then Argentina makes some rather weird moves, to be honest. It supports Mato Grosso into Rio Grande, and then Argentina actually jumps into Mato Grosso. So that was a pretty odd turn of events, like the moves of Argentina at this point. And then, Venezuela covers Caracas because you were in East Caribbean, and also goes for Para, which is, I think, a good move because now Venezuela can actually grab Manaus, but also can threaten South Salvador, which is suddenly, unoccupied.
Yes.
So, yeah,
For Brazil.
exactly. Yeah, pretty rough year for Brazil.
Going to the retreats phase, we see that New Granada goes to Caquetá.
In Argentina to Asunción over there, yeah.
Oh, yes. I forgot he had a retreat.
Yeah.
And in the build phase...
I didn't build anything. I didn't gain incentives actually that year, yeah.
You didn't gain anything. Mexico got a few builds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mexico gets 3 builds here. A pretty great year for Mexico, right? Havana, Guatemala, and Texas. And is very well set to hit the USA. And frankly, at this point, Mexico is looking like the North American leader, right? It's in a very strong position.
Yes.
Yeah. New Granada builds an army, I think, in Cali over there, which is, coming handy in Bogota, actually. I think, it managed to move Panama to Cali and build an army in Bogota. And I believe Venezuela at this point builds an army in Angostura because it had to cover Caracas because you were in East Caribbean, which means that, Venezuela cannot build a fleet in East Caribbean. So actually that was a good thing for me too, in part by chance.
He could have built a fleet in Maracaibo, but I guess he was not interested in becoming a Caribbean naval power just yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the focus of Venezuela at this point is to kill Brazil quickly.
To the south, anything interesting here before we move on to spring?
I think Chile building an army. So Chile got one build, right? But it built an army in Talca. And at this point, given that I didn't get any builds, I think if I had gotten a build, I would have actually built it in the Malvinas. But since I didn't get a build at this point, Chile getting a build from the Galapagos and building in Talca, that's pretty much the end of my southern possessions at this point. I wasn't nervous of Brazil actually going for Patagonia because I was, even though I was friendly with Argentina, I was talking with Brazil quite a bit as well. And Brazil had assured me, that he would actually go for Buenos Aires or some Argentinian centers. But at this point, I knew that with Chile building, I wouldn't be able to hold on to either Patagonia or the Malvinas in the long run.
Yes, that's... Unfortunately, I can see that reality too.
Any comments from you?
Oh, no, I was paying very little attention to the south at this point, frankly.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
Hi, folks. Florida Man here with a small interjection. Just wanted to suggest, if you made it this far into the video, you must have liked it. I mean, you must have enjoyed it. So you should probably click the like button if you haven't already, like about 70 or 80% of the people who are watching. You know who you are. Go on. Now back to your regularly scheduled enjoyment.